Caleb Brooks slammed $50,000 in cash onto the kitchen table, and his 7-year-old daughter just stared at it like it was a bomb. Maybe it was. Because that money didn't come from hard work. It came from a contract. A marriage contract. Signed with a billionaire CEO he'd met exactly once in the rain in a restaurant he could barely afford to sit in. He told himself it was temporary. Business. Clean. But nobody warned him about the bedroom. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for all 5 parts. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Caleb knew it was bad before he even opened it. The envelope had that particular corporate weight to it, thick official, the kind that didn't carry good news. He'd been getting a lot of those lately. The eviction notice. The overdraft alert from his bank. The form letter from his daughter's school about the upcoming field trip payment that was already 2 weeks overdue. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him and turned the envelope over in his hands, twice, then set it flat on the table and just looked at it. From the bedroom down the hall, he could hear Lily singing to herself. Some song from that cartoon she loved, the one about the little girl who talked to animals. She sang it every morning while she got dressed, always slightly off-key, always perfectly happy about it. He listened to her sing for a long moment. Then he opened the letter. Due to unforeseen financial circumstances, Harmon Construction and Development will be permanently closing all operations effective immediately. All employee contracts are hereby terminated as of this date. Final paychecks will be issued within 30 days, pending liquidation of company assets. He stopped reading. He already knew what the rest of it said. He'd been working for Harmon Construction for 4 years. 41 hours a week, sometimes 45 when they needed overtime. He knew every foreman on the crew by first name. He knew the best lunch spots near every job site in the city. He'd worked through rain, through heat waves, through a week in January, when the temperature dropped so low that the water in his thermos froze solid by noon. 4 years. Gone in one paragraph. He folded the letter carefully, the same way he folded everything neat, deliberate, like neatness might somehow contain the damage, and slid it back into the envelope. Then he got up, poured his cold coffee down the sink, and started making pancakes. Lily came out of the bedroom 17 minutes later with her backpack on sideways and one pigtail slightly higher than the other. "Daddy, I had a dream about a purple elephant." "Yeah. Was he friendly?" "I was very friendly. He helped me find my library book." "Smart elephant." "He was. He said his name was Gerald." Caleb set a plate of pancakes on the table and fixed her backpack strap without being asked. "Daddy, are we going to the zoo this weekend? You said maybe." "I said maybe." Maybe means yes sometimes. Maybe means maybe, baby girl. She climbed into her chair and drowned her pancakes in syrup with the focus and intensity of a surgeon, and Caleb watched her and felt something move through his chest that he didn't have a name for. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't grief. It was something older and heavier than both of those things combined. I thought about Marcus Webb, the guy who'd worked the crane beside him for the last 2 years. Marcus had 3 kids. He thought about Devin Pritchard, who'd just bought a house. He thought about all of them, all the men who'd gotten the same letter this morning, and he tried to find comfort in the company, but found none. His problems were his problems. Nobody else was going to solve them. The thing people never understood about losing your job was that it wasn't just about the money. The money was devastating, yes. The money was the nightmare that woke you up at 3 a.m. with your heart pounding and your hands cold. But the money was also concrete, specific. You could make lists about money. You could calculate how many weeks of rent you had left, how many groceries you could afford, exactly which bill you could defer, and for how long. What you couldn't calculate was the identity. For 4 years, Caleb Brooks had been a construction worker. That was the answer he gave when people asked what he did. That was the shape his days had. Wake up. Make Lily breakfast. Drop her at school. Work. Pick her up. Make dinner. Help with homework. Put her to bed. Spend 3 hours in the garage repairing old furniture he bought at estate sales and resold for a small profit enough to cover the gaps to keep the numbers from going completely red. That was his life. That was the structure he'd built. And now the center of it had been pulled out. He spent the first day making calls. He spent the second day sending emails and filling out applications online. He spent the third day driving to 4 different job sites to ask in person, because sometimes in person was better. Sometimes looking a man in the eye and giving him a firm handshake meant more than a resume. Every site said the same thing. Nothing right now. Things are slow. Leave your number. By the end of week 2, Caleb had burned through most of his emergency savings paying the rent. By the end of week 3, he'd sold the 2 nicest pieces of furniture. He'd restored a mahogany side table and a vintage rocking chair. He'd been particularly proud of for less than they were worth because he needed the cash quickly. He didn't tell Lily any of this. She was 7. She didn't need to carry it. But kids sense things. They always do. One evening, Lily came into the garage where he was working on a cracked dresser drawer and stood in the doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small stars on them. "Daddy." "What are you doing?" "It's past 9. I couldn't sleep." "You want some water?" "No." She came over and leaned against his arm, the way she'd done since she was tiny, just her small weight resting against him. "Are you worried about something?" "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're sanding the same spot over and over. You do that when you're thinking hard." He looked down at the dresser. She was right. He'd been sanding the same 6-inch section for 10 minutes. He set the sandpaper down and put his arm around her. "Everything's okay. Promise." He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "Promise," he said anyway. "Go back to bed. Go back." She went. And Caleb sat in the garage with the unfinished dresser and the single overhead light and the cold that was starting to creep in under the door, and he thought about the promise he'd just made. He didn't know if he could keep it. His wife's name had been Dana. He didn't let himself think about her often because thinking about her too much made him stop functioning, and he could not afford to stop functioning. But on the hard nights, she was always there at the edges of his mind, present the way a missing limb is present, felt most deeply in its absence. Dana had been a teacher, 3rd grade. She had this gift for making children feel seen, genuinely seen, like their opinions and their questions and their weird little ideas were the most important things in the world. She brought that same gift home with her every day. She saw Caleb the same way, completely clearly, without the softening that most people applied to the people they loved. She'd died of an aneurysm at 33. No warning. No slow deterioration to prepare him. There one morning and gone by afternoon. Lily had been 4 years old. In the weeks after, Caleb had functioned on pure mechanical necessity. Feed the child. Dress the child. Take the child to the daycare down the street. Go to work. Come home. Feed the child again. Bathe her. Sing her to sleep the way Dana used to, even though his voice was not made for singing, and he knew only about 6 songs well enough to remember all the words. Grief counselors say there are stages. Caleb had never been very interested in stages. He'd had a daughter who needed breakfast and a landlord who needed rent, and those 2 facts left very little room for stages. He survived. He kept moving. He built the structure of his days, and he maintained it with the same careful discipline he applied to restoring broken furniture, patient, methodical, 1 piece at a time. And now that structure was crumbling. 3 years of work and sacrifice, and he was right back at the edge of the cliff, looking down. It was raining the night he met Vivian Whitmore. He'd taken Lily to this small Italian restaurant, not fancy. Nothing fancy, but it had good bread. And the owner, a round-faced man named Tony, always gave Lily an extra cannoli because she asked him politely in Italian, which she'd learned specifically for this purpose. It was supposed to be a small celebration. Lily had gotten a perfect score on her reading test. In the current landscape of everything falling apart, that felt like something worth marking. They were just finishing dessert when Lily spotted someone she recognized. "Daddy, that's the lady from TV." "What lady?" "The one who was on the news. She built the big building downtown. Ms. Whitmore." Caleb glanced across the restaurant without much interest. The woman sitting 2 tables away was dressed simply for someone of her apparent status. Dark blazer, no visible jewelry, beyond a small watch hair pulled back with a precision that suggested it had taken real effort to look that effortless. She was alone, and she was not eating. She was staring at a document on the table in front of her with an expression that Caleb recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone doing math that wasn't coming out right. He'd seen it in the mirror plenty. He looked away and signaled Tony for the check. "Can we say hi? Lily." "She seems nice." "You don't say hi to strangers in restaurants. You say hi to strangers all the time. That's different." "How?" "Because I'm an adult." "That doesn't make sense." He paid the check. He'd planned this dinner carefully, set aside the exact amount, no more, and was helping Lily into her jacket when he noticed that the woman Whitmore was now looking directly at him. Not the casual glance of someone whose gaze had drifted. Something more deliberate. He nodded politely and turned back to Lily. "Excuse me?" The voice was clear and direct, the kind of voice that was used to being heard in large rooms. Caleb turned. Vivian Whitmore was standing at his table. Up close, she was younger than he'd have guessed from the news, early 30s maybe. Her expression was composed, but there was something in her eyes that was working hard to stay composed. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I've been trying to get up the nerve to do this for the last 40 minutes. Lily beamed at her with the pure delight of someone who had been completely right about something. "You're Lily," Vivian said, looking at his daughter. Lily's eyes went wide. "You know my name. I know your father's name too. Caleb Brooks, construction worker. Recently laid off from Harmon Development." She paused. "I know that sounds alarming. I promise I'm not a stalker. I had my assistant do a background check." Caleb looked at her steadily. "You had your assistant run a background check on me?" "Yes." "Before you introduced yourself?" "Before I came to make you a very unusual offer. I wanted to make sure you were who I thought you were." "And who did you think I was?" She reached into her jacket and placed a business card on the table, then set a small sealed envelope beside it. "Someone I can trust," she said, "which is a rarer commodity than you might think." I didn't open the envelope that night. He put Lily to bed, cleaned the kitchen, and set the envelope on the counter, and went into the garage and worked on the dresser for an hour. When he came back in, it was still there. He picked it up, turned it over, set it down again. He wasn't afraid of it. He was afraid of what it might do to the decision he would make. Because already, just from those 4 minutes in the restaurant, he knew enough to know that Vivian Whitmore was not someone who did things without a reason. She was not impulsive. She was not careless. Whatever was in that envelope had been carefully considered, which meant the offer was real, which meant he had to take it seriously. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. He unfolded it and read it in the silence of his kitchen at 11:30 at night. The words were clean and legal and utterly surreal. Marriage contract. Term 12 months. Compensation, $50,000 paid in 2 installments. He read it twice. Then a third time. Then he put it back on the table and sat very still for a moment. $50,000. That was 2 years of his old salary. That was his daughter's college fund. That was the security he'd been trying to build for 3 years, brick by patient brick slipping away under him. That was the promise he'd made his daughter. He picked up his phone and called the number on the business card. It was almost midnight. He expected voicemail. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Brooks." "Ms. Whitmore, we need to talk about the specifics before I give you any kind of answer." A brief pause. When she spoke again, he thought he heard the faintest trace of relief in her voice, quickly controlled. "Of course. Are you available tomorrow morning?" He met her at her office building downtown the next day at 9 a.m. He'd worn the nicest things he owned. Dark slacks, a gray button-down. He'd ironed carefully the good shoes he kept for job interviews. Not because he was trying to impress her. Because he had his own dignity, and he wasn't going to walk into this conversation looking like he was desperate, even if he was desperate. The lobby of Whitmore Global was the kind of space designed to communicate power through sheer-scale high ceilings, stone floors, the company name in steel letters on the wall that were each about 4 feet tall. The receptionist was polished and professional and led him to an elevator without making him wait. Vivian's office was on the 32nd floor. The view from her windows showed half the city spread out below, the kind of view that said, "I have already won," without a single word. She was standing at the window when he came in. She turned when the door opened. In daylight, without the rain and the soft restaurant lighting, she looked different, sharper, more controlled. She was in a charcoal suit, and she moved with the kind of economy that came from years of people watching every move she made. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the background check." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "Please sit down." They sat across from each other at a table to the side of her desk. Not at the desk itself, he noticed. Deliberately neutral ground. "Tell me why," Caleb said. He didn't reach for the coffee that had been set out. "Not the document version, the real reason." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read. "My grandfather built this company from nothing. He was brilliant, and he was ruthless, and he built something that has provided employment for 12,000 people. I loved him." She folded her hands on the table. "He was also a man of his time, which is a polite way of saying he had beliefs about what a woman's life should look like, that he held on to until the day he died. His will includes a codicil. Before I can assume full control of the company, not acting CEO full control, I must demonstrate that I have established a stable family unit. Those are the exact words. Stable family unit. The codicil becomes active 60 days from now, and if you don't satisfy the condition, control of the company goes to a board committee, which in practice means it goes to Alexander Vaughn, who has been waiting for this exact opportunity for 6 years. Who's Alexander Vaughn? My grandfather's former business partner's son. He owns a 17% stake. He's been positioning himself to take majority influence since my grandfather's health declined. He's smart, he's patient, and he despises me. Why? Because I'm everything he thinks a CEO shouldn't be. I'm young, I'm a woman, and I've spent the last 3 years dismantling several of his most profitable schemes, which happen to be either unethical or illegal. He hasn't forgiven me for any of it." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "So you need a husband." "I need a husband. Specifically, I need one who can't be bought by Alexander Vaughn, who would look credible at company events, and who won't become a security liability." She met his eyes directly. "Your background check was exceptionally clean. 3 years as a devoted single parent. No debt beyond normal expenses. No criminal history. No history of instability of any kind. And several people who know you described you as, and I'm quoting here, the most genuinely decent man they'd ever met." Caleb absorbed this. That's a lot of research for a stranger. It's a lot of money for a stranger. $50,000, he said. $50,000. What exactly does this require of me? She slid a copy of the contract across the table. It was thorough. He read every page while she waited, and she didn't rush him or try to fill the silence. The terms were clear. He would move into her home. They would attend public events together as a married couple. They would maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage for 12 months. He would receive the first $25,000 upon signing. The second $25,000 at the completion of the term. There was a non-disclosure agreement, a code of conduct clause, specific provisions for Lily's welfare and schooling, and a section outlining what would happen if either party broke the agreement. "What about my daughter?" he said when he'd finished. "The contract has provisions." "I don't mean the contract, I mean Lily. What does she get told? What is she supposed to think? She's 7 years old. I'm not going to let her believe something false." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I hadn't thought about it from that angle." "That's because you don't have kids." "No, I don't." She considered. "What would you suggest?" "I'd tell her the truth. Age-appropriate truth. That this is an arrangement. That we're helping each other. She's smart enough to understand that people help each other sometimes, even in unusual ways. And she's young enough that a year won't define her understanding of what marriage is supposed to be." Vivian nodded slowly. "That's reasonable." "And she stays in her school. No switching schools, no uprooting her routine more than necessary. Whatever this is, she doesn't pay for it." "Agreed." And I want it understood whatever role I'm playing in public in that house, I'm her father first. That doesn't change. Something moved across Vivian's face for just a moment. Something that looked almost like respect. Agreed, she said again. Caleb set the contract back on the table. One more question. Go ahead. Why me specifically? You're a brilliant woman with unlimited resources. You could have hired anyone. An actor, a professional, someone trained for this kind of thing. Why a construction worker from the East Side who repairs furniture in his garage? She held his gaze without flinching. Because actors perform, professionals calculate. And what this situation requires is someone who is simply genuinely, exactly who he appears to be. Someone Alexander Vaughn can't find a lever on because there are no levers. No debts he can buy. No ambitions he can offer. No secrets he can threaten. She paused. You're not impressive to them. They'll underestimate you immediately. And that is in my experience exactly the kind of person that dangerous men can't handle. The room was quiet. Rain had started outside while they'd been talking, tracing thin lines down the floor-to-ceiling windows. Caleb looked at the contract on the table. He thought about Lily asleep this morning, when he'd left her small face relaxed and unworried, completely trusting that her father had the world handled. He thought about the field trip form sitting on the kitchen counter, with a red past-due stamp on it. He thought about Dana, about what she would say if she were here. He thought about it honestly, not the idealized version. Dana had been practical. She had been pragmatic about money in the way people are pragmatic when they've grown up without enough of it. She would have looked at this situation, and she would have asked exactly the questions he'd just asked, and then she would have said, Caleb, this is an answer. It's an unusual answer, but it's an answer. Don't let pride turn it into a problem. He picked up the pen. $25,000 on signing, he said. Correct. And Lily's school fees for the full year covered directly outside the contract sum. Non-negotiable. She blinked just barely. That wasn't in the contract. I know. I'm asking for it anyway. A beat. Agreed, Vivian said. He signed the contract. He drove home through the rain and sat in the car in front of his apartment building for a while before going in. Then he went upstairs and knocked on Mrs. Patterson's door across the hall. She was 72 and retired, and had been watching Lily for him since the layoff, waving away his attempts to pay her with a firmness that made him feel humble and grateful in equal measure. She's in there watching her show, Mrs. Patterson said. Ate all her lunch, said hello to my cat in Spanish, which I still don't know how to feel about. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, for everything. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. You okay, baby? I think I'm going to be, he said. I think things are going to change. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she patted his arm once with her papery hand and went back inside. Caleb stood in the hallway of his apartment building, peeling wallpaper, flickering light at the far end, the smell of someone's cooking drifting from below, and felt the weight of what he'd just done settle over him. He'd signed a contract to marry a billionaire he'd met once in a restaurant. He'd done it for his daughter. He told himself, standing there in the flickering hallway, that that was all it was. He told himself that with complete conviction. He was wrong, of course, but he didn't know that yet. Lily took the news with the particular gravity of a 7-year-old who has already absorbed more adult reality than she should have had to. He sat her down at the kitchen table with hot chocolate. Her thinking drink she'd decided at age 5, and he'd never contested it, and he told her. Not the contract, not the money, not the details she couldn't process. He told her the essence. There's a woman who needs help. She's in a difficult situation, and I'm going to help her by pretending to be her husband for a while. And in return, she's going to help us. Lily stirred her hot chocolate. She did this when she was thinking slow, methodical circles with the spoon. What kind of help? The kind that means we don't have to worry about money for a while. The kind that means you can go on the field trip and I can get you new school shoes without having to do math about it first. More stirring. Is she nice? I don't know her well yet. But is she mean? I don't think so. Where does she live? Big house. You'll have your own room. Lily considered this. Does she have any pets? I didn't ask. You should ask. I will. Another long circle with the spoon. Then, Daddy, does this mean you're married? He thought carefully. It means we're acting like we're married, like in a play. But you and me, that part doesn't change. I'm still your dad. That's not acting. She looked at him for a long moment with Dana's eyes, and something in his chest constricted. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay. She picked up her mug. You should probably find out about the pets, though. It's important information. He laughed. He hadn't laughed like that, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere unexpected in a long time. Yeah, he said. I'll ask. They moved in on a Saturday. They didn't have much. 4 boxes, 2 suitcases, Lily's backpack stuffed to capacity, and a garbage bag of stuffed animals that she had refused to leave behind. The house, he'd been told it was a house. It was not a house. It was a statement stood at the end of a private drive behind a gate, and it was the kind of place that made Caleb understand immediately and viscerally exactly how different these two worlds were. Lily pressed her face against the car window as they drove up. Daddy. Yeah. Are we going to live here? For a while. It's like a castle. It's a house. It has a fountain. I see the fountain. Does the fountain have fish in it? He didn't know. He made a mental note to find out. The front door opened before they reached it, and Vivian was there. Not a housekeeper, not an assistant, but Vivian herself, in jeans and a simple shirt, which surprised him. She'd clearly made some effort toward normalcy, toward not standing in the doorway in a power suit to greet a 7-year-old and her father with 4 cardboard boxes. Lily was out of the car before Caleb could say anything, walking toward Vivian with the fearless directness of a child who has not yet learned to be intimidated by wealth. Hi, I'm Lily Brooks. My dad says you need help. Something moved across Vivian's face. Something genuine and unguarded quickly recovered. That's right. I'm Vivian. Do you have any pets? I have a goldfish. His name is Theorem. Lily absorbed this seriously. That's a math word. It is. I like math. Then you and Theorem will get along. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied on this front. Then she turned back to her father. She seems okay, she announced as though Vivian weren't standing 6 feet away. Caleb met Vivian's eyes over his daughter's head. And for just a moment, just a second, barely anything less than anything, he saw her. Not the CEO, not the contract, not the woman who'd had him background checked before introducing herself. Just a person. Someone who looked for just that one unguarded instant, like she had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at without an agenda. He looked away first. He picked up the nearest box and carried it through the front door. Let's see this room, he said to Lily. And the arrangement, careful, contracted, mutually beneficial, completely temporary, began. He told himself that's all it was. He told himself that every day. For exactly as long as it took to learn he was wrong. The first morning was the hardest. Not because anything went wrong, because nothing did. And somehow that was worse. Caleb woke at 5:15, the way he always did. No alarm, just the internal clock that 4 years of early construction shifts had permanently installed in him. He lay still for a moment in the guest room that was larger than his entire former apartment, staring at a ceiling that was at least 12 feet high, and let the reality of where he was settle over him like cold water. He was in Vivian Whitmore's house. He was on paper Vivian Whitmore's husband. He got up, found the kitchen after one wrong turn, down a hallway lined with doors he didn't open, and started making coffee. The kitchen was enormous and immaculately organized, and had the particular sterile quality of a space that has rarely seen actual cooking. Every appliance was top of the line. The coffee maker alone probably cost more than his last month's rent. He found the coffee. He figured out the machine. He made a full pot. Howe was standing at the counter drinking his first cup when Vivian walked in. She was in a robe, her hair loose, reading something on her phone, and she stopped dead in the doorway when she saw him. They stared at each other for a moment, the particular awkward stare of two strangers who have agreed to share a life they don't yet know how to share. I made coffee. She looked at the pot. You made coffee. Seemed like a reasonable thing to do. She came into the kitchen and poured herself a cup, with the careful movements of someone who has not yet decided how much space to take up in this new arrangement. I usually just have my assistant send up a cup from the lobby cafe. Your assistant brings you coffee at home. She's very thorough. Or you've never learned how to work the machine. A pause. It's a complicated machine. It has 4 buttons. She looked at the coffee maker, then at the cup in her hand. Then very slightly the corner of her mouth moved. It has 4 relevant buttons, she said with a dignity that was entirely deliberate and entirely unconvincing. There are others. Caleb drank his coffee. They stood in the enormous kitchen in the early morning quiet, not talking, and it was strange he'd expected it to be more uncomfortable than this. He'd expected the silence to feel hostile or tense or weighted with the artificiality of what they were doing. Instead, it just felt like morning. He didn't examine that too closely. Lily discovered the pool at 7 a.m. and had to be physically redirected toward breakfast. She sat at the kitchen island eating cereal and interrogating Vivian with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has decided to conduct a full assessment before rendering a final judgment. What do you do all day? I run a company. What does that mean? It means I make decisions about how the company operates. I hire people, manage resources, set strategy. What strategy? It's a plan for achieving a goal. Lily considered this. Like when I decide which homework to do first, so I have time for TV. Exactly like that. But with billions of dollars and several thousand employees. That sounds stressful. It has its moments. Daddy gets stressed too. He sands furniture when he's stressed. Do you do anything when you're stressed? Vivian glanced at Caleb. He kept his face neutral and focused very intently on his eggs. I work more, Vivian said. That doesn't sound very relaxing. No, I suppose it isn't. Lily ate a spoonful of cereal. You should try the furniture thing. Daddy says using your hands is good for your brain. I'll keep that in mind. Do you have any other fish besides Theorem? No, just Theorem. He must get lonely. Fish don't get lonely. Daddy says everyone gets lonely sometimes. This time, the silence had a different quality to it. Caleb finally looked up from his eggs and found Vivian looking at Lily with an expression he didn't have a name for, something careful and open and slightly undone. Your dad might be right about that, Vivian said quietly. Lily nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has made their point and moved on. Can I see the pool after breakfast? The logistics of the arrangement were complex in ways Caleb hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't the public events those he'd prepared himself for, braced against, treated like a job that required a specific skill set he would develop. It was the small things, the way the household staff. There were 4 of them, and they were all unfailingly professional, and all watching everything with quiet, careful eyes deferred to him now. Not because they believed the marriage was real necessarily, but because the structure of the household demanded it. He was on paper the man of the house. He found this deeply uncomfortable. The housekeeper, a woman named Gloria, who had been with Vivian for 6 years, had the particular skill of communicating entire conversations through single glances. On the 3rd day, she handed him a schedule of the week's household events and looked at him with an expression that said, I have seen things you cannot imagine, and I intend to reserve judgment for now, but I am watching. Thank you, Gloria. Of course, Mr. Brooks. You can call me Caleb. Of course, Mr. Brooks. He decided not to push it. The schedule was detailed. There was a charity gala on Thursday evening, their first public appearance as a couple. There was a board lunch on Friday that he was not required to attend, but that Vivian had marked in red with a note that said, Alexander will be probing for information through any avenue available. All staff should be aware. There was a weekend social gathering at the home of someone named Harland Kress, who was apparently an important investor and whose wife was, according to a separate note, the most effective information distribution network in the city. I was reading through this when Vivian came home that evening. He'd noticed she arrived home late. This was the 3rd day in a row. She came through the front door at 8:30, still in her work clothes, carrying her phone and a leather folder, and the particular expression of someone who has been solving problems since before sunrise and hasn't finished yet. She went straight toward the stairs. "There's food," Caleb said. She paused. "I'm not particularly—" "Lily helped make it. She's been asleep for an hour, but she made me promise to tell you she picked the seasoning." Something in Vivian's posture changed just slightly, a millimeter of tension releasing. She came to the kitchen. He'd made baked chicken nothing, elaborate with roasted vegetables and rice. He put a plate in front of her and poured her a glass of water and sat across from her and went back to reading the schedule, because she didn't need him staring at her. She ate 3 bites before she slowed down. "This is good." Lily chose the garlic powder. "I can tell. She has strong opinions about garlic. She has strong opinions about everything." "Yeah, she does." He turned to the page of the schedule. "Thursday's gala. What do I need to know?" Vivian set her fork down and shifted into work mode, with a speed and completeness that was almost physical, like a gear change. "It's the Whitmore Foundation annual event. About 300 guests, significant media presence. Our appearance there will be the first time we're seen publicly as a couple. Alexander Vaughn will be there. He will be watching every interaction between us for any sign of inauthenticity." What does an authentic married couple look like to someone like him? Comfort, specificity, genuine knowledge of each other. She paused. "He'll ask questions designed to catch us in inconsistencies. Small things: where we went on our honeymoon, how we met, what my husband thinks of my work. He'll use the information to probe for contradictions later. So we need a story. We need a story. Then we should talk." He closed the schedule. "When's the last time you ate before this?" She blinked. "I had—" She stopped. "Lunch." "What did you have for lunch?" "A meeting." He looked at her. "I had coffee at the meeting, and there were pastries. I may have had half a pastry." Half a pastry. It was a long meeting. "Vivian, you need to eat actual food." She looked at him with an expression of faint surprise, as though the statement were unusual. As though the concept of someone noting her eating habits with genuine concern, rather than obligation, was a new data point she didn't know what to do with. "Eat," he said, and went back to the schedule. She ate. They built the story over the next 2 evenings, sitting at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep, the house quiet around them. They were methodical about it. Caleb had a legal pad and a pen because that was how he processed information, wrote it down, organized it, made it concrete. They covered the basics first. Met at a restaurant 6 months ago. He'd helped her when her car had a problem in the parking garage. They'd exchanged numbers. They'd dated quietly, privately, both of them cautious people by nature. "Why were you cautious?" Vivian asked. "Because I have a daughter, and I don't bring people into her life unless I'm serious." "And why was I cautious?" "Because every person who approaches you wants something, and you've spent so long waiting for that moment when you figure out what they want that you've forgotten what it feels like when someone doesn't." The pause that followed was different from the previous ones. Vivian looked at her notepad. She wrote something on it. "That's very close to the truth," she said without looking up. "I know. The best cover stories usually are." She looked up at him then. There was something in her expression that he couldn't categorize, not quite challenge, not quite discomfort, something more complex than either. "You're perceptive." "I've had to be. Single parent. You learn to read people fast because you don't have time to recover from trusting the wrong ones." She considered this. "What was your wife like?" I wasn't expecting the question. Not because it was inappropriate, it was relevant strategically to building the story, but because of the directness of it. Most people circled around the topic of Dana, the way you circle around a bruise, not sure where the edges are. She was a teacher, 3rd grade. She was practical and funny, and she called things exactly what they were, which I appreciated enormously. She died when Lily was 4. "I'm sorry." "It was 3 years ago." "That's not so long." "No." He looked at the legal pad. "For the story, do you want me to talk about her if it comes up, or avoid the topic?" "Talk about her. Avoiding it would look suspicious." Any man who lost his wife and has a daughter that age, the topic would naturally come up. Okay. And it'll create sympathy, which is useful. Right. He wrote something on the pad. What about your parents? This time the pause came from her side. My parents died when I was 19. Car accident. I'd just started college. She said it with the clean precision of someone who has practiced saying it so many times that it no longer catches on anything. My grandfather raised me effectively, in a professional sense. He brought me into the company the summer after they died, and he never let me stop working. Was that kindness or control? She looked at him. What? Keeping you busy. Was he doing it to help you grieve, or to keep you from having to? Another silence, a different kind. I've never thought about it in those terms. You don't have to answer. It's not part of the story. No. She looked at the notepad. I think it might have been both. He was a complicated man. He loved me in the way that people love things they don't want to lose, which isn't always comfortable for the thing being loved. Caleb wrote nothing. He just listened. He also couldn't conceive of a woman in my position without a husband, Vivian said, which is infuriating even now, even after everything, even standing in the exact evidence of how limited that belief was. She stopped herself. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. It's relevant. Is it? Yes. Because if you walk into that gala angry about this and hiding it, Vaughn will see the hiding. But if you walk in having actually processed some of it, you'll just look like a woman who's had to fight hard for her position and is at peace with having won. He paused. Which is what you are. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Someone easier to manage. He almost laughed. Sorry to disappoint. I didn't say it was a disappointment. Thursday arrived with the particular pressure of a performance for which there would be no second chance. Caleb had one good suit. He'd bought it 2 years ago for a job interview he didn't get, and it still fit, and it was dark navy and well cut, and he'd steamed it twice to make sure it was perfect. He stood in front of the mirror in his room and tied his tie with the same care he applied to everything. Methodical, deliberate, getting it right, because sloppy work was not something he permitted himself. Lily watched him from the doorway in her pajamas. You look handsome, Daddy. Thank you, baby. Are you nervous? No. Your jaw does the thing it does when you're nervous. He deliberately relaxed his jaw. I'm not nervous. I'm focused. That's what you said before my school play, and you forgot to turn off the car, and the battery died. The battery was already going. He turned to look at her. She was grinning. Go back to your show. Gloria's here if you need anything. I know. She came forward and fixed his pocket square, which he hadn't asked her to do, and which she had no particular expertise in, but she patted it firmly, like she had completed a critical task. You're going to be fine. Thank you. Tell Ms. Vivian she looks nice. Why? Because Daddy, she got her hair done today, and she thinks nobody noticed, but I noticed, and you should tell her. He looked at his 7-year-old. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Lily said with complete serenity. You're just noticing more. Vivian was waiting in the entrance hall when he came down. She was in a deep burgundy gown that was elegant in the way that serious women choose elegant, not decorative, not designed for attention, designed for authority. Her hair was up. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had been in rooms like the one they were walking into 100 times and had never once let them see her hesitate. She looked composed and polished and entirely controlled. She also, Lily was right, looked beautiful. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and she turned. You look good, he said. Your hair, Lily noticed. She wanted me to tell you. Something moved across Vivian's face, something small and quick and genuine. She's very observant. She comes by it honestly. He offered his arm. Ready. She looked at his arm, then at his face. Then she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow with a composure that only slightly masked the fact that it was the first time they'd touched. Ready, she said. The gala was everything the schedule had prepared him for, and nothing like he'd expected to feel inside it. 300 people in a ballroom that had been designed to look like wealth was effortless. Waitstaff moving with precision between clusters of people who all had the same particular quality of attention, the quality of people who are always evaluating, always calculating, always watching who's talking to whom and what it might mean. Caleb had spent 4 years in construction, where you learn to read a room fast because a misread room could mean a dropped load, or a missed signal, or someone getting hurt. This room was different, but the skill was the same. He could feel the shift the moment they walked in. The subtle turn of heads, the recalibration. I was not what they were expecting. He understood that immediately and clearly. He was not a polished executive or a socialite, or someone who had been manufactured for this kind of space. He was just a man. And he understood, standing in the doorway with Vivian's hand on his arm, that was exactly what she'd needed. 3 people approached in the first 5 minutes. Caleb watched Vivian manage each conversation with the surgical precision of someone who had been doing this since she was 19 years old and had no one else to do it for her. She was brilliant at it. She knew who needed flattery and who needed deference and who needed to be challenged, and she calibrated each interaction without visible effort. He stayed present. He didn't perform. He shook hands, he made eye contact. He listened more than he spoke. When someone asked him a question, he answered it directly and without elaboration, because he'd learned long ago that the most confident thing a person can do in an unfamiliar room is refuse to oversell themselves. A man named Terrence Holt, who apparently sat on 3 different boards and owned something significant in Atlanta, cornered Caleb near the bar, while Vivian was pulled into a conversation with a cluster of shareholders. "So you're the man who finally caught Vivian Whitmore." "That's not really how I'd describe it." "How would you describe it?" "She asked me out. I said yes. Most of the credit goes to her." Terrence Holt laughed, genuine surprised. "I like that. What do you do?" "Construction. I'm between projects right now." Vivian Whitmore married a construction worker. Not mocking. Recalibrating. "Well, she's always been full of surprises." "She is. That's one of the reasons I said yes." He excused himself a few minutes later and went to find Vivian. He found her first by finding Alexander Vaughn. I knew Vaughn before anyone pointed him out. Medium height, silver-haired, the specific kind of handsome that comes from a lifetime of resources and no real obstacles, and eyes that were doing 3 calculations simultaneously behind whatever expression his face was displaying. Vaughn was talking to Vivian. Caleb moved toward them without hurrying, without any change in his pace or his expression, because the worst thing he could do was look like he was moving toward them. He arrived at Vivian's side, naturally the way you arrive at the side of someone you know well, and put his hand briefly on the small of her back. A brief light contact that said, "I'm here," without announcing it to the room. He felt Vivian take a breath. "Only asking because the timeline seemed compressed," Vaughn was saying. His voice was smooth, conversational, the kind that made everything sound like a reasonable question. 6 months is fast for a woman who's been notoriously private. "Some things don't require a long timeline," Caleb said. "When you know, you know." Vaughn turned to him with an expression that shifted almost imperceptibly into assessment mode. "Caleb Brooks, I've heard about you." Alexander Vaughn, "I've heard about you too." "Good things, I hope." "Specific things," Caleb said pleasantly. "Vivian's thorough about preparation. I suppose that's what makes her good at what she does." Something moved behind Vaughn's eyes. A recalculation. "Where did you 2 meet?" "Restaurant. I held the door for her and she told me I had good timing. Turned out she meant it in a business sense too." He glanced at Vivian with the specific quality of warmth that is impossible to manufacture convincingly, which is why he'd decided not to manufacture it, but to actually find something real to put there. He found it. He found the version of Vivian who'd eaten half a pastry and called it lunch, who'd looked at Lily with that unguarded expression that morning in the kitchen. He found that person, and he looked at her. "She's the smartest person I've ever been in a room with. That gets your attention pretty fast." Vivian was looking at him. Not performing looking at him. Actually looking. Vaughn watched this exchange with the precise focus of a man who has built his career on finding the seams in things. He didn't find one. "Well, Vaughn said after a moment that lasted just a beat longer than comfortable. You're a lucky man. Every day, Caleb said. The crisis happened at 9:47. Caleb knew the exact time because he'd just checked his phone to see if Gloria had texted about Lily, and he'd registered the time just before the commotion started near the far end of the ballroom. A senior VP named Roland Fitch. Caleb had met him briefly on arrival. Sharp-faced man mid-50s was having what appeared to be a controlled but rapidly escalating conversation with two men from a company called Castellan Partners. Caleb caught the words, "Contract breach and liability exposure and legal action this week," in the 3 seconds it took him to cross the room. He got there before Vivian did. "Gentlemen?" All three men turned. "I don't believe we've met, Caleb Brooks." He shook hands with the two Castellan men with the firm direct grip of someone who is completely comfortable. "Roland, do you want to step back for a moment?" Roland Fitch looked like a man who had been drowning and had been unexpectedly thrown a rope. "The contract that came into question, which one specifically?" Caleb asked the Castellan men. They explained. It was a supply chain agreement with an ambiguity in the penalty clause that both sides were interpreting differently, and the difference represented a significant enough number that neither side had any interest in being the one to blink first. Caleb listened to all of it. He asked two questions. He asked them the way a man asks questions when he is genuinely trying to understand rather than score points. Then he said, "The way I'm reading. What you're describing, the ambiguity actually works in both your favors if you choose to read it that way. The question is whether you want to spend 6 months in litigation establishing who's right, or spend 6 minutes agreeing on an interpretation that gets you both closer to what you actually want from this deal." Silence. "The relationship between your companies is worth more than this specific clause," Caleb said. "That's not a legal opinion. That's just a construction worker's understanding of what happens when you spend more time fighting about the contract than doing the work." One of the Castellan men looked at the other. "I like him," the taller one said. Roland Fitch looked slightly dazed. By the time Vivian reached them, the conversation had de-escalated into something that would require formal follow-up, but had lost its emergency status. The Castellan men excused themselves. Roland grabbed Caleb's arm. "That was how did you?" "I've mediated a lot of construction disputes. Contractors, subcontractors, suppliers. The situations are different, but the dynamic is usually the same. Two parties who both need the relationship to work, but neither one wants to be the first to say so." Vivian was looking at him with an expression he'd seen once before. In the kitchen that morning. The one he didn't have a name for. "You negotiated down a potential lawsuit," she said, "at a party." It wasn't a lawsuit yet. Those two men were deciding whether to make it one. There's a window in that kind of decision, and if you can get in the window before it closes. "How did you know there was a window?" "Because they were still there. If they'd decided, they'd have left already." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where did you learn to read a room like that?" 4 years of job sites. You learn who's about to walk off a project before they know it themselves. You learn the difference between someone who's actually angry and someone who needs someone to help them back down without losing face. She looked at him for a long moment. "Caleb. Yeah. You are not what I expected." "You said that already." "I'm saying it again because it keeps becoming more true." Tukan. They rode home in this car in a different kind of silence than the one they'd arrived in. The kind that has weight. The kind that says something has shifted without being able to name what it is or where exactly it shifted, or whether that shifting is safe. "Vaughn wasn't convinced," Vivian said after a while. "No. But he wasn't sure either, which is better than I expected from tonight. He'll keep looking." "Yes, he will." "What will he look for?" "Inconsistencies, cracks, something he can pull on." She looked out the window. "He's going to try to get to you directly. He'll find a way to get you alone at some point, and he'll make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "The kind that involves money and information. He'll want you to confirm that this isn't real. Or he'll want you to give him something he can use, some detail about my life, my business decisions, something." "And when he does?" She turned to look at him. "I don't know," she said with a honesty that surprised him. "That's what I can't calculate, Because I don't actually know who you are yet. I know who the background check said you are. But that's different. He looked at her in the dim light of the car. I signed a contract, Vivian. Not with Vaughn. With you. Contracts can be renegotiated. Not by me. He held her gaze. I don't renegotiate things I've agreed to. That's not who I am. Your background check should have found that too. Another silence. It did, she said quietly. That's why I hired you. They didn't say anything else until they were home. I was in the kitchen at 11:15, making the cup of tea that had become his end-of-day ritual since the coffee maker incident, when he heard her moving around in the study down the hall. He poured a second cup and went to the door and knocked once. I'm working, she said. I know, there's tea. A pause. I don't usually drink tea. Tonight you do. He heard her chair move. She came to the door and took the cup and looked at him with an expression that he was beginning to recognize, the expression of someone who keeps encountering a situation they don't have an existing response for. Thank you, she said, simply, without the management she usually applied to everything. Get some sleep eventually. I have 3 reports. There'll still be reports in the morning. She looked at the tea, then at him. You're very... She stopped. What? Calming, she said, like it was a complaint. It's annoying. Sorry. You're not sorry. No, he agreed. I'm really not. Something happened in her face then, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the thing that happens just before a smile in a person who doesn't smile easily. It lasted about 1 second, and then she had it back under control. Good night, Caleb. Good night. She went back into the study, and he went upstairs, and he lay in the too large bed in the too large room and stared at the 12-foot ceiling and thought about that fraction of a second, that almost smile, the way it arrived before she could stop it. He thought about it longer than he should have. I thought about it until his own practical common sense intervened, which sounded remarkably like Dana's voice, low and direct. Caleb Andre Brooks, don't complicate this. He almost smiled at that. He could hear exactly how she'd have said it. The full name was always the tell. Full name meant she was serious. Don't complicate this. He wasn't going to complicate this. This was a contract. A business arrangement. A situation he'd agreed to for reasons that were still completely valid and completely clear. He closed his eyes. He was not going to complicate this. 3 weeks in the rhythm of the household had evolved in ways that neither of them had planned, and neither of them mentioned directly, because to mention it would have required acknowledging it, and acknowledging it felt like acknowledging something else entirely. Caleb cooked. Not every night the household had staff for that, but several nights a week, because it was something he knew how to do, and something that made the enormous kitchen feel less like a stage set and more like a room people lived in. Vivian started coming home earlier on the nights he cooked. Not dramatically earlier. 20 minutes. 30. But consistently. He didn't point this out. She didn't explain it. Lily, who missed nothing, chose not to comment on it either, which meant she had definitely noticed it and had made a strategic decision not to say anything, which in a 7-year-old represented a level of social sophistication that Caleb found mildly alarming. The Harlan Cress gathering was on a Saturday afternoon. It was less formal than the gala, a social event at a private home, the kind where business gets done without looking like business gets done. The host was a large, friendly man who laughed loudly at his own jokes and appeared uncomplicated until Caleb watched him manage 3 different conversations simultaneously across a crowded living room without appearing to move at all. The host's wife, Margaret Cress, was as advertised. She had the particular gift of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room while extracting information from you at a speed that would have been impressive in an interrogation setting. Within 6 minutes of meeting, she knew his daughter's name, his former career, his late wife, how he liked his coffee, and his general feelings about the current state of American infrastructure. He liked her immediately and respected her completely, and answered every question with the complete truth. Because the best way to handle an expert information gatherer is to give them accurate information efficiently and watch them lose interest in looking further. And how did you meet Vivian? She held a door for me and said I had good timing. It turned out she was right. He'd reversed it from how he'd told Vaughn. Margaret noticed and approved. "She's different with you," Margaret said, glancing across the room to where Vivian was in conversation with two men Caleb recognized as board members. "I've known her for 4 years. She's always very contained, managed." She looked back at Caleb. "Today she checked for you twice in the last 10 minutes. He kept his face neutral. "Did she? Just to see where you were. She wasn't obvious about it, but I was watching." Margaret smiled at him. "She hasn't done that with anyone, ever, in 4 years of these gatherings." "I'm sure there's a practical explanation." "I'm sure there is too, dear." She patted his arm with the same knowing energy as someone who has watched enough human beings to recognize a truth before the humans involved have gotten there themselves. "I'm sure there is." It was on the drive home from the Crest gathering that it happened for the first time. Not something dramatic, not a moment that could be pointed to as a clear line crossed. Just Vivian reaching over and taking his hand. Not for the benefit of anyone watching. There was no one watching. They were in the back of the car, the partition up. No reason, no audience, no strategic purpose. She reached over and took his hand. The way people do when they are tired and something has been heavy and the person next to them is a solid thing in a day that has had too many uncertain ones. She seemed to realize what she'd done about 3 seconds after she did it. He felt her notice it. Felt the slight tension that came with noticing. He didn't move his hand. She didn't let go. They rode the remaining 12 minutes home in silence, and neither of them looked at the other, and neither of them said a word about it. But when she finally let go, stepping out of the car, her fingers left his. The way you leave a warm room, not suddenly, not gladly, but because the door was already open, and there was no good reason to keep standing still. He sat in the car for an extra moment after she went inside. He thought about Dana's voice. "Don't complicate this, Caleb." But his hand was still warm where hers had been. And the thing about warmth is that once you've felt it, you know exactly what cold is. He sat there for another moment. Then he got out of the car. He went inside. He made sure the door was locked. He checked on Lily. He went to bed. He stared at the ceiling for a very long time. The storm came on a Wednesday, not a metaphor. An actual storm, the kind that moves in fast off the coast, that the Weather Service underestimates by about 40%, that arrives while you're still thinking you have time to prepare, and then suddenly, you don't. It knocked out a section of the roof over the east wing, the part of the house that housed 3 of the 4 guest rooms within the first 2 hours. By midnight, water had come through the ceiling of 2 of them, and Gloria was directing the household staff through the damage with the focused efficiency of a general managing a retreat. Caleb had spent the evening moving things. Lily's books, some boxes of records from the study, a piece of furniture that had been under a leak. He worked without being asked because there were things that needed doing, and he was the person available to do them. That was the entirety of his reasoning. At 12:40, Gloria found him in the hallway outside the guest rooms, with a look on her face that had crossed from professional composure into something approaching genuine regret. "Mr. Brooks, how bad is it?" "Both habitable guest rooms have water damage to the ceiling and flooring. The contractors won't be able to assess until morning, and won't begin repairs for at least 48 hours after that." He understood before she finished the sentence. "There's only one other room." "Yes, sir." He stood in the hallway for a moment. "I can sleep on the couch in the study. Ms. Whitmore instructed me to tell you." Gloria paused, and he had the distinct sense that she was editing the instruction for delivery. That the study couch is not her word was appropriate, and that the situation is temporary and practical and does not require. Another small pause. "Drama." She said drama. Her exact word, yes. He almost smiled. He kept it contained. "Tell Ms. Whitmore I'll be up in 20 minutes. Gloria nodded with the particular careful neutrality of a woman who had worked in this household for 6 years and had developed strong opinions she had absolutely no intention of sharing. He knocked before entering. Vivian was at her desk, still in work clothes, her laptop open, a second document spread across the surface beside it. She looked up when he came in, and her expression was the expression of someone who had pre-decided to be completely matter-of-fact about something, and was committed to that decision. "There's a clear boundary on the left side of the bed," she said. "I've put a pillow there." "Okay." "I sleep on the right. I don't move much." "Okay. And I work until about 1, so if you need to sleep earlier." "Vivian." She stopped. "It's a bed," he said. "I've slept in worse conditions than half a bed in a room this size. We're adults. It's fine." She looked at him for a moment, then back at her laptop. "Right," she said. "Of course." He got ready for bed, with the practicality he brought to everything. He'd slept in a car once during a particularly brutal winter when the heat went out in his apartment and he hadn't wanted Lily to be cold. A king-sized bed with a pillow boundary was not a hardship. He was in bed reading when she turned off the desk lamp at 1:10. He heard her moving through the dark. She knew the room, he didn't, and then the other side of the bed shifted with her weight. Silence. The storm had moved past, but left rain behind, the soft, persistent kind that drummed against the windows without urgency. "You handled the East Wing faster than my staff did," Vivian said into the dark. "Your staff was trying to preserve things. I was just trying to move them. You didn't have to help. There was work to do." Another silence. "You do that constantly," she said. "Do what?" "Find the work and do it. Without being asked. Without calculating whether it benefits you." I thought about this. I grew up with a father who said that if you can see what needs doing, the seeing is enough reason to do it. You don't need more reason than that. That's a very specific way to move through the world. It's the only way I know. The rain moved against the windows. In the distance, he could hear the faintest sound of Lily breathing through the baby monitor he'd brought from his room, an old habit he maintained, even though she was 7 now, because the sound of her breathing was still the most stabilizing thing he knew. "What's that sound?" Vivian asked. "Baby monitor. For Lily." A pause. "She's 7. "I know. Do you still worry about her that much?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how to explain this to someone who hasn't lost a person without warning," he said. "But after Dana, after it happened that fast, no warning. Nothing, you develop a relationship with the idea that things you love can disappear while you're not looking. So you look more." He paused. "It's not rational. I know she's fine. I know she's 7 doors down in a perfectly safe room. But hearing her breathe tells me she's still here. And that's worth whatever it costs in terms of seeming human," Vivian said quietly. He looked toward the ceiling in the dark. "Yeah, human." Another long silence. Then, "I understand that more than you might think." He waited. "When my parents died," she said, and her voice was different. Not the managed voice, not the CEO voice, something older and more unguarded. The voice of a 19-year-old in a hospital corridor that she'd built a corporation on top of and never fully paved over. "I was at college, 3 states away. My roommate woke me up, and I remember thinking before I was fully awake that everything was fine. That specific second between sleeping and waking where you don't know yet." She paused. "I've been afraid of that second ever since. Every morning. The moment before you know." Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. Not because he didn't have words, but because some things deserve quiet before they receive a response. "What do you do with it?" he asked. "In the morning, that second." "I start working," she said. "Immediately. If I'm working, I know what's real." "That's why you're up until 1 every night." "That's one of the reasons." He lay in the dark and thought about 2 people in different kinds of grief, building different kinds of walls, and how strange it was that those walls had brought them to the same bed, in the same room, in the same storm. "You should sleep," he said. "I know. Work will still be there. You say that every night." "Because every night it's still true." He heard her shift a small, restless movement. "Caleb." "Yeah. Thank you for tonight. The East Wing. Not making this a pause. More difficult than it is." "It doesn't have to be difficult," he said. "If we don't make it difficult." The rain. The soft sound of his daughter breathing. "Good night." Vivian said. "Good night." He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he'd moved into this house, he fell asleep quickly. He didn't examine why. Some truths are easier to receive when you're already half asleep. They shared the room for 6 days before the contractors finished the first guest room. 6 days was long enough for things to become ordinary that had no business becoming ordinary. He learned that she read for exactly 30 minutes before sleeping. Always something non-work related. Always from an actual physical book rather than a screen. A discipline she maintained with the rigor of someone who has read enough research about sleep to know what it requires. He learned that she slept on her right side facing away from his half of the bed. He learned that she was silent during sleep, but woke with complete alertness. No grogginess, no transition. One moment, asleep, and the next moment fully present, which explained a great deal about how she functioned in the world. She learned that he was an early riser, even in a house with nothing requiring him to rise early. That he made the bed before leaving the room. That he talked to Lily on the monitor some mornings. Quiet, one-sided conversations. "Good morning, baby. Sleep well. I'll see you in a few minutes," that he seemed completely unconscious of. On the 4th morning she mentioned it. "You talk to her through the monitor, in the mornings." "I know. Sorry if it wakes you." "It doesn't wake me." She was fastening her watch, not looking at him. I just noticed." "It's a habit. From when she was small. She used to wake up scared sometimes and—" He stopped. "You don't need the explanation." "I wasn't asking for one." She set her watch. "I was going to say that it's a kind thing, the way you do it." He looked at her. She picked up her phone with the composure of someone who has just slightly miscalculated how much of herself she intended to share. "Coffee's probably ready," she said and left. He stood in the room for a moment. He was learning that Vivian Whitmore communicated her most important things sideways, not directly. Not the way she handled business, but at an angle in the narrow spaces between efficient statements in the fraction of a second before she closed herself back down. He was learning to listen for those spaces. He was starting to think that was a dangerous skill to develop. It was on the 5th night that she told him about the hospitals. He'd found out by accident 2 weeks earlier. Not that she'd told him, but that Gloria had mentioned it in passing. The way you mention something you've assumed everyone knows. That Ms. Whitmore volunteered at a pediatric ward at City General on the first Saturday of every month. Had done it for 4 years. Never publicized, never photographed, never mentioned in any company profile or press release. He hadn't asked about it. It wasn't his business. But it had been sitting in the back of his mind as a piece that didn't fit the architecture of the person everyone else seemed to see when they looked at Vivian Whitmore. On the 5th night, he was still awake when she came in, and it was later than usual, and she moved differently. Quieter. The particular quietness of someone who has spent time in a space where you automatically lower your voice and slow down and hasn't completely shed it yet. "You were at the hospital," he said. She stopped. "Gloria," she said, not quite a question. "She mentioned it a while ago. She thought I knew." Vivian sat on the edge of her side of the bed. She didn't answer right away, and he didn't push. He'd learned that her silences were not evasions. They were processing the same way his hands needed to work when he was thinking hard. "There's a little girl on the ward," she said finally. "Her name is Amara. She's 5. She's been there for 8 months." A pause. "She has no one who comes regularly. Her mother is in a situation that makes it complicated. So I come." He was quiet. "I read to her. Sometimes I just sit with her. She calls me V because she decided early on that Vivian was too long." Something moved in her voice, a warmth that was completely unguarded, completely real. The warmth of a person who has been allowed to be themselves fully in one specific room with one specific small person for 4 years. She's remarkably funny for a 5-year-old with a serious illness. She has opinions about everything. She told me last month that my hair was too serious. Lily would agree with that. A small sound, almost a laugh. They would get along catastrophically well. "Why don't you publicize it?" he asked. "The board would love that story. It would help with the image you need to project." "Because it's not for the image." She said it with a sharpness that was immediate and complete. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's mine. It's just mine. She paused. There's very little in my life that isn't also a strategy or a message or a component of something else. Amara she's just a little girl who deserves someone to show up. That's all. I don't want it to be anything else. He lay in the dark thinking about that. About the woman. The board saw controlled strategic, every action calculated. About the woman who drove to a hospital on a Saturday morning and sat with a sick 5-year-old who called her V because Vivian was too long. You're not what I expected either, he said. She was quiet. What did you expect? Honestly, someone easier to keep at a distance. He heard her breathing change just slightly. Is that a problem? She asked carefully. He thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, he said. Ask me again in a month. He should have seen Vaughn coming. In retrospect, the setup was clear. A casual invitation to lunch from Roland Fitch, the VP, whose almost lawsuit Caleb had helped de-escalate at the gala. Just lunch between two men who'd met briefly, Roland said, wanting to express his gratitude properly. A restaurant 2 blocks from the Whitmore building, private booth, good food. Roland Fitch was there for exactly 9 minutes before he excused himself for a phone call. Alexander Vaughn sat down in his place with the ease of someone who is entirely accustomed to being the most powerful person at any given table. I apologize for the theater, Vaughn said. Roland is a good man, but he can't have a conversation that matters. I needed a reason to get you to a neutral location. Caleb picked up his water glass. What do you want? Directness. I appreciate that. Vaughn settled back in his chair with the composed authority of someone who has been underestimating people for so long. He's forgotten there are people worth not than what Vivian Whitmore has offered you. You don't know what she's offered me. I know exactly what she's offered you. I have very good lawyers and better investigators, and the contract you signed while legally sealed has edges. $50,000. For a man in your position, at the time of signing, that's transformative money. I understand the decision. He paused. I'm prepared to offer you 3 times that. Caleb set the water glass down. $150,000. Vaughn continued. Transferred to an account of your choosing within 48 hours of a conversation, a private conversation, in which you confirm on record that the marriage is contractual rather than legitimate. That's all. 1 conversation. You walk away with enough money to... No. Vaughn paused. You didn't let me finish. You'd finish the relevant part. 150,000. I heard you. Caleb looked at him directly. The answer is no. It was no before you sat down. It's going to be no when you stand back up. There is no number that changes it. Vaughn studied him with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. You realize what you're protecting, Vaughn said carefully, is a woman who purchased your presence, who created a document assigning you a monetary value and had you sign it. Whatever you think is happening in that house, Mr. Brooks, you are a contractual employee, and employees generally don't sacrifice $150,000 out of loyalty. I'm not doing it out of loyalty. Then why? Caleb leaned forward slightly. Because I agreed to something, and I'm going to honor it. That's not about her. That's about me. I don't renegotiate agreements when a better offer comes through. That's not who I am. He kept his voice level and his eyes steady. And with respect, Mr. Vaughn, you've just told me everything I needed to know about how you operate. You use people as leverage against other people. You calculate everyone's price. You sit down at tables under false pretenses and expect that the money will handle the rest. Vaughn's expression hadn't changed, but something behind it had. Your problem, Caleb said, is that you've been in rooms where that works for so long, you've forgotten that some people can't be handled. Not because they're not smart enough to see the offer, but because the offer is beside the point. A silence. You're going to walk away from $150,000, Vaughn said quietly. To protect a contract you're already being paid for. I'm going to walk away from your offer, Caleb said. Because it's not an offer. It's a test of whether you can find my price, and you can't. So I'm going to finish my lunch and let Roland Fitch know that his table is available. He picked up the menu. Vaughn stood. He straightened his jacket with the precision of a man who cannot allow himself to look rattled. "This will become complicated for you," Vaughn said. "Whatever you think this is, it will become complicated." "Things usually do," Caleb said without looking up from the menu. "That doesn't mean you let someone else decide how you handle them." He told Vivian that night. He'd considered not telling her, not because he wanted to protect her from the information, but because he was aware that the way you deliver a thing can change what it does to the person receiving it, and he wanted to get it right. He waited until after Lily was asleep. He found Vivian in the sitting room with a file she was marking up, and he sat across from her and said, "Vaughn made contact today." She went very still. He told her everything. The setup. Roland Fitch, the amount, his response. He told it straight order, without editorializing. When he finished, she set the file down on the cushion beside her. 150,000, she said. "Yes. And you said no." "I said no." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was looking at them, and he watched something move through her, some private reckoning, some internal assessment that he couldn't see the workings of, but could see the effects of, in the slight tension at the corners of her eyes. "Why didn't you take it?" she asked. Her voice was carefully neutral, trying to be. "It's 3 times what I'm paying you. You could have Vivian." "It's a rational question. It's not a question about the money." She looked up. "Then what is it a question about?" "You already know the answer to that," he said quietly. "You knew it before you asked." Another silence, longer this time. "You realize," she said carefully, "that you've just made yourself a target. He won't offer again. The next move will be pressure, some other kind." "I know. He'll find something. Dig into your background further, look for leverage." "Vivian," he held her gaze. "I know. That's okay." "It's not okay. You didn't sign up for—" "I signed up to be your husband. In the contract, and in what that actually means when someone tries to come at what we've built here, whatever that is." He paused. "I'm not leaving you to deal with Vaughn alone. That's not who I am, and by now you know that." She looked at him for a long time. He watched her work through it, the part of her that wanted to manage this, to thank him efficiently, and fold it into strategy, and move forward with the information processed. He watched that part of her encounter, something it didn't have a protocol for, and he watched the moment she stopped trying to find one. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly." "Go ahead." She took a breath. "What is this for you? What is this actually?" He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know, but because the knowing was something he'd been carrying carefully, the way you carry something that could break if you moved with it too fast. "It started as a contract," he said. "You know that. And the contract is real. The money is real. I'm not going to pretend those things aren't what they are." He paused. "But somewhere in the last few weeks, somewhere between the coffee maker and the gala, and 6 nights listening to rain through the same window, it stopped being only that." She was very still. "I don't know what to do with that," he said honestly. "I haven't—" He stopped, started again. "After Dana, I stopped being a person who thought about himself in that way. I was Lily's father. That was the whole of it. And I was at peace with that." A pause. "And then you came and sat down with your background checks and your $50,000, and somehow without either of us planning it." "Caleb." Her voice was tight. "I know. I know this is not what the contract—" "Stop." She stood up from the couch, and he thought for a terrible moment that she was going to leave the room, end the conversation, close back down with the efficiency she was so practiced at. She didn't leave. She stood in front of him, and she looked at him with an expression that had no management in it at all. Nothing controlled, nothing calculated, nothing behind which she was keeping herself safe. Just her face. Just her. "I don't know what to do with it either," she said. She stopped. "I've been in this building, in this company, in this world for 15 years, and I have been very good at making sure that nothing got in past the part of me that makes decisions. Because the part that makes decisions is the part that keeps the company safe, and keeps Alexander Vaughn on the outside, and keeps everything my grandfather built from being dismantled." She held his gaze. "And then you moved into my house and you made coffee at 5 in the morning, and you said things like, there was work to do, like it's the most natural thing in the world to just take care of things, just because they need taking care of, and I don't—" Her voice caught barely just a fraction. "I don't know what to do with a person like you, Caleb. I genuinely don't." He stood up. He didn't touch her. He just stood in front of her close enough that the distance was no longer a question. "That makes two of us," he said. They stood there for a moment that had no strategy in it, no contract, no Alexander Vaughn, no $50,000, no board of directors, no dead wife, no history that either of them could hide behind. Just two people who had found each other in the most improbable way, in the most complicated arrangement with all the reasons in the world to keep things exactly as agreed. He raised his hand, and very gently, the way you touch something you're not sure you're allowed to touch, brushed a strand of hair back from her face. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, the decision was already made, not said, not negotiated, just arrived at the way some decisions arrive from somewhere below reasoning. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, and they stood like that in the quiet of the sitting room, with the whole complicated world outside, and this one real thing between them, and for a moment, that wasn't long enough, nothing else existed. Then her phone rang. She pulled back. She looked at the screen, and her expression changed, the professional mask dropping back into place so fast, it was almost physical. "It's the legal team," she said. "I have to. Take it." She looked at him for one more second, just one, with the expression still visible underneath, just barely through the composure. Then she walked out of the room. He sat back down on the couch and pressed his palms flat on his knees and breathed. He sat that way for a long while. He heard her voice down the hall, sharp and precise, and entirely commanding the voice that ran a company that went 12 rounds with Alexander Vaughn and came out standing. He thought about what she'd said. "I don't know what to do with a person like you." He thought about the strand of hair, and the closed eyes and the forehead against his, and the 1 second of her face open and unguarded, and fully completely present. I thought about the phone call and the legal team and the board, and Vaughn and the contract that was the reason he was in this house in the first place. He thought about all of it clearly and honestly, the way his father had taught him to look at things straight on, no softening, no wishful editing. He was in love with her. I didn't know when it had happened. He knew it was real. He knew it with the same certainty he knew how to read a room, and when a beam was load-bearing, and how his daughter's breathing sounded when she was having a good dream versus a bad one. He also knew that love, however real, was not sufficient by itself to make the complicated thing they were living simple. The phone call ended. He heard her footsteps down the hall. She stopped in the doorway. "The call," she started. "It's fine. We should probably—" "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you should sleep. Tomorrow we can figure out what we do with all of this." She looked at him from the doorway with that expression again, the underneath one, the real one. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." She went upstairs. He stayed on the couch for another hour, turning it all over in the quiet, until the house had settled completely into its nighttime stillness, and the only sound was the distant hum of the city and the far-off steady sound of his daughter breathing. He listened to her breathe. He thought, "I'm not afraid of complicated. I've never been afraid of complicated." He thought, "Dana, I'm doing the best I can." He turned off the lamp. He went upstairs. He did not know yet, could not have known that by the time tomorrow came, everything would already be on fire. The fire came from a direction he hadn't fully anticipated, not Vaughn directly. Not a legal maneuver, not a board challenge, not another lunch setup with a different proxy. It came from the press, from a single photograph and 4 words published at 6:17 in the morning on the front page of the city's most widely read business journal, the kind of publication that Vivian had told him early on was read by every board member before their first cup of coffee. Caleb saw it on his phone before he was fully out of bed. The photograph was of him and Vivian at the Crest gathering. Taken from a distance, slightly angled, the kind of shot that required either a very good lens or someone positioned deliberately. They were standing close together near the far end of the room, not touching, but with the specific proximity of two people who have stopped calculating how close they're standing. Her face was turned slightly toward him. His hand was at her elbow, not holding it. Just present the way your hand finds the person beside you without a conscious directive. It was a real moment. That was the devastating thing about it. Underneath the photograph, in the clean, bold typeface of serious journalism, CEO's paid husband, the truth behind Whitmore's marriage. And below that, in smaller text, the details. The contract. The amount. The circumstances. Not all of it. Not the private things, but enough. The $50,000. The 12-month term. The clause about family stability in Richard Whitmore's will. Laid out with the particular clinical precision of someone who had been handed the information in exactly the right order to make it look like a scandal. He put his phone down on the nightstand. He stared at the ceiling. He picked it up and read it again. He was dressed and downstairs in 8 minutes. Vivian was already at the kitchen counter, her phone in her hand, her laptop open, 3 different notifications stacking visibly on the screen from where he stood. She was in the clothes she'd worn the night before. He didn't think she'd slept. She looked up when he came in. "You've seen it," she said. "Yes." "I'm sorry." He stopped. "What are you apologizing to me for?" "Because you're in it. Your name, your background, the fact that you were a laid-off construction worker when I found you. It's all there. It's framed to make you look—" She stopped, controlled herself. "They framed it to make you look like someone who was purchased, like you didn't know what you were agreeing to, like you're either complicit or naive. I'm neither. I know that. Who gave them the contract?" She turned back to her laptop. "My legal team is working on that now. There were 3 people with access to the full terms. Roland Fitch, my personal attorney, and—" A pause. Someone in Vaughn's orbit would have had to make a significant offer to get to one of them. "Roland. I don't know yet." Her hands moved over the keyboard. "I don't want to believe it was Roland." "What does your instinct say?" She didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. "My phone started ringing at 6:30, she said instead. "The board is calling an emergency session for this afternoon. Vaughn has already sent a statement to 3 publications expressing his concern for the company's stability." She said the word like it tasted of something chemical. "He's been building toward this for weeks. The Castellan situation, the gala, the crest gathering, all of it was data collection. He was waiting for something he could take to the board. And now he has it. And now he has it." Caleb went to the coffee maker and made the pot. He did it with the same methodical steadiness he brought to everything, the same unhurried competence that had nothing to do with the situation, being calm, and everything to do with the choice to be calm in the situation. He put a cup in front of her. She took it without speaking. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter, and he watched her think, watched her work through the crisis, the way she worked through everything systematically, pulling the threads apart, assessing what could be controlled and what couldn't. "They're going to use this to remove you from control," he said. "That's what the emergency session is." "Yes, and your grandfather's codicil. If the marriage is publicly acknowledged as contractual, does that invalidate the family stability condition?" She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. "The codicil requires that I demonstrate a stable family unit. If the board determines the marriage was fraudulent, they can argue the condition isn't met. Vaughn will push for that interpretation." "Can they legally make that argument?" "They can make any argument they want. Whether it holds legally is a different question. But a board vote doesn't require a courtroom. It requires a majority." "How many votes does Vaughn have?" "Currently 5 confirmed to his side. He needs 7 to force a change in executive control." "How many are genuinely undecided?" 3, possibly 4. "And the session is this afternoon?" 3 o'clock. He drank his coffee and thought. "What's your play?" he asked. She looked at the laptop. "My attorney is drafting a statement that the marriage, while beginning as a contractual arrangement, has evolved into a genuine relationship, and that the spirit of the codicil family stability is represented in our current situation. It's defensible. It's not—" She stopped. "It's not the whole truth. It's not a lie either." "I know, but it's not the whole truth." She set her cup down and looked at him with the expression that had no management in it. The underneath one. The one he'd been seeing more of in the past 3 weeks and that she'd stopped fully hiding. Caleb, you don't have to. Tell me what the whole truth would do for you, strategically. If you went into that room and you told them exactly what happened, all of it, the contract, the reason, and what it became, what does that do? She was quiet. It would. She thought about it, and he watched her think about it, watched her turn it over with the mind that ran a 12,000-person company. It would be unpredictable. It would remove the narrative advantage from Vaughn because he's built his case on exposure, on the idea that the truth is being hidden. If I walk in there and give him the truth first. She paused. He loses the weapon. He loses the weapon, Caleb said. But I lose the... She stopped again. What? She looked at him directly. I lose the distance, she said quietly. The board has always respected the distance, the control. If I walk into that room and tell them that a fake marriage became real, that I have actual feelings for a man I hired. She exhaled. They'll see a weakness. Or, Caleb said carefully, they'll see a person. She looked at him. And sometimes, he said, a person is harder to vote against than a policy. Lily came downstairs at 7:15. She read the room the way she always read rooms, not the surface of it, but the underneath. She looked at her father's face, and at Vivian's posture, and at the laptop, and the multiple phones, and the specific quality of silence that wasn't peaceful silence, but working silence, the kind that has something heavy in it. She climbed onto a stool at the kitchen island and accepted the bowl of cereal Caleb set in front of her and ate 3 spoonfuls thoughtfully. Is something happening? She asked. There's a situation at Ms. Vivian's company, Caleb said. She's handling it. Is it bad? It's complicated. Lily looked at Vivian. Ms. Vivian. Vivian looked up from her laptop. When I had a problem at school with destiny marks. Remember I told Daddy about it. The teacher said the best thing to do was just say the true thing out loud instead of trying to manage it. Because managing it makes it bigger. Vivian held her gaze. What was the problem with destiny marks? She told everyone that I'd cheated on the spelling test. I hadn't. And I kept trying to explain it in a complicated way, and nobody was listening. Then I just stood up and said, I didn't cheat, and explained exactly what happened, every single thing, and everyone believed me. Lily ate another spoonful of cereal. Because the true thing doesn't have extra parts, she said. That's what the teacher said. The true thing is just itself. It doesn't need help. The kitchen was very quiet. Vivian looked at this 7-year-old girl with her cereal and her complete, uncomplicated certainty. Your daughter, Vivian said to Caleb without taking her eyes off Lily. I know, Caleb said. She's extraordinary. I'm aware. Lily looked between them. Am I going to school today? Yes, Caleb said. Okay. She finished her cereal. Ms. Vivian, you should eat breakfast. Daddy says you need actual food. Your father says that frequently. He's right about it, though. Vivian looked at Caleb. Something moved across her face in the circumstances in the morning and the wreckage of the story that was in every business publication in the city. Something that might, under other conditions, have been close to a smile. She reached over and took a piece of toast from the plate Caleb had set on the counter. Breakfast, she said. Lily nodded with the satisfaction of a completed mission and took her bowl to the sink. He drove Lily to school and walked her to the door the way he always did. She hugged him at the entrance, the specific hug she'd developed somewhere around age 5, arms fully committed, face pressed against his coat. Daddy. Yeah, baby. Is Ms. Vivian going to be okay? Yes, she's very capable. I know she's capable. She pulled back and looked up at him. I meant, is she going to be okay? Like how she feels. He looked at his daughter. I hope so, he said honestly. You should make sure, Lily said with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to complicate simple truths. That's what we do, we make sure. She went through the door. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the morning air and thought about what it meant to have raised a person like that. This clear-eyed, serious, funny, perceptive 7-year-old who understood instinctively that the question of someone's capability and the question of how they were doing inside were different questions that both deserved answers. I thought about Dana, who would have looked at Lily and felt the particular bittersweet pride of recognizing your own best qualities reflected back from someone you loved. He thought about Vivian sitting at that kitchen counter, working through the crisis with that beautiful, exhausted mind, carrying 15 years of everything alone. He got in the car. He drove back to the house. He had some things to say before 3 o'clock. She was in the study when he got back on a call with her legal team. He could hear the sharp efficiency of her voice through the door, not raised, never raised, but carrying the particular authority of someone who needs things done in a specific way, in a specific window, and is accustomed to being understood. He waited in the kitchen. She came in 22 minutes later. "They're recommending I let the attorneys manage my statement at the board meeting," she said. Carefully worded, legally sound minimizes emotional exposure. "And what are you recommending?" "I'm still deciding." He leaned against the counter and looked at her. "Vivian, can I say something to you that has nothing to do with the legal strategy?" She met his eyes. "Yes. You've been managing your own story for 15 years, since your parents died, since your grandfather handed you a company, and the grief and the need to be extraordinary in order to survive all of it. And you are extraordinary." That part worked. But the managing— He paused, choosing the words. "The managing is also why Vaughn thinks he can take something from you. Because the story you've been managing has an inside and an outside, and he got to the seam." She was very still. "If you walk into that room today with another managed version, even a better one, even a legally airtight one, there's always going to be a seam. There's always going to be another Vaughn with a camera and 4 words." He looked at her steadily. "But if you walk in there and you give them the whole thing, all of it, the contract, the reason, what happened after, then there's no seam. Because the story is the same on every side. And you wrote it, not him." She looked at the window. He waited. "I'm afraid," she said. The words were quiet and completely direct, and he understood immediately what they cost her to say. "I know," he said. "Not of losing the vote. I can rebuild from a lost vote. I've rebuilt before." She turned to look at him. "I'm afraid of standing in that room and saying out loud that it stopped being a contract and having people look at me the way people look at you when you've let something show that you weren't supposed to let show. You mean the way they look at you when you're human?" "Yes. Vivian." He crossed the kitchen to her. "You are already the most human person in that building. You go to a hospital on Saturday mornings. You have a goldfish named Theorem. You learned how to work a 4-button coffee maker because someone pointed out that you didn't know how." He stood close enough that the distance between them was a decision, not a default. "Letting them see that isn't weakness. It's the thing that makes everything you've built mean something beyond the numbers." She looked at him for a long moment. "What if they vote against me anyway? Then we deal with that, together, and you'll still be exactly who you are, which is formidable and completely intact." He held her gaze. "But I don't think they vote against you. I think you walk in there and you say the true thing. Lily's words, and you give Vaughn nothing to build on because the story is already told, by you." She was quiet for a long time. Then she straightened that specific movement, the one that preceded every version of Vivian Whitmore that the world got to see. Shoulders settled, jaw set, eyes clear. But this time, there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Not armor, something stronger than armor, actual ground. "I need an hour to prepare what I want to say," she said. "You have 2. And I need—" She stopped. "What?" "I need you to come with me, to the meeting." He looked at her. "I'm not a shareholder. I'm not on the board. I have no standing in that room." "You're my husband," she said. "On paper, and—" She paused. "And in every way that matters. You have standing by being there." He nodded. "Then I'll be there." The Whitmore Global Boardroom was on the 34th floor, 2 floors above Vivian's office, and it had the same quality as everything else in the building, designed to communicate power, scale, permanence. 12 people around a long table when they walked in. Vaughn at the far end, already seated with the composed expression of a man who believes he has already won and is waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Every person in the room looked at Caleb when he walked in beside Vivian. I was familiar with the particular quality of that attention, the recalibration, the assessment, the rapid calculation of where he fit and what it meant that he was here. He didn't perform anything. He sat in the chair beside Vivian's at the head of the table, folded his hands in front of him, and met Vaughn's eyes across the room with the same steadiness he'd brought to every room Vivian had ever walked him into. Vaughn looked at him. Caleb looked back. Then the board chair, a compact silver-haired woman named Diane Forsyth, who had the bearing of someone who has seen everything and been surprised by none of it, called the meeting to order. We're here to address the matters raised by the publication this morning regarding the nature of Ms. Whitmore's marriage. Alexander, you requested the session. Do you want to open? Vaughn did. How was good? Caleb had known he was good, and watching him confirmed it. He laid out the situation with the measured concern of a man who had practiced not sounding pleased about the thing pleasing him most. The contract, the codicil, the question of whether the condition of family stability had been satisfied in good faith. He used the word legitimacy 4 times. He used the phrase, the board's fiduciary responsibility, 3 times. He was precise and controlled, and completely devastating in the way that only careful preparation can be. When he finished, Diane Forsyth looked down the table. Vivian. Vivian stood. She didn't have notes. She'd decided against notes in the car on the way over. Caleb had watched her make the decision, had watched her put the notepad she'd prepared back in her bag, and fold her hands, and look out the window, and arrive at the meeting with nothing but herself. She stood at the head of the table, and she looked at each face in the room, one by one, not rushing it. Then she said, everything in that article is true. The contract is real. The $50,000 is real. I hired Caleb Brooks to pose as my husband because my grandfather's will had a condition I couldn't meet any other way, and I was not willing to let 15 years of work be handed to someone who has spent 6 of those years trying to dismantle everything my grandfather and I built together. She didn't look at Vaughn. She didn't need to. I made a calculated decision under significant pressure, and I am not going to stand in front of this board and pretend otherwise. The room was very quiet. What the article didn't say, Vivian continued, is what happened after. What happens when you bring a person into your life, and that person turns out to be exactly what you needed in ways you never anticipated needing? What happens when a single father who fixes furniture in his garage and gets up at 5 in the morning and asks for nothing except to be dealt with honestly? What happens when that person walks into your very controlled, very managed life and refuses to be managed? She paused. I started this as a business arrangement. I did not plan to feel anything beyond professional gratitude toward a man doing a job I'd hired him to do. She finally looked at Caleb. He looked back at her. He refused $150,000 from Alexander Vaughn, she said, looking at the board again. Last week. A direct approach, a private offer confirmation that the contract was fake in exchange for triple what I was paying him. He said no. Not because of the contract. Because, and these are his words, I agreed to something and I'm going to honor it. Not legally bound. Not watched. Not managed. Just that's who he is. The silence had a different quality now. My grandfather's codicil requires a stable family unit, Vivian said. And I want this board to look at the man sitting at this table and tell me with a straight face that what we have is not stable. That a man who drives his daughter to school every morning and cooks dinner 3 nights a week and moves water-damaged boxes in a storm without being asked, that is not a person who builds stable things. Her voice was steady. The contract is how it started. That is not how it is. She sat down. The room sat with it. Vaughn cleared his throat. With respect, Vivian, and what you're describing is a change in a personal relationship that doesn't legally. Alexander. Diane Forsyth said the name with the specific weight of someone who has been waiting for a moment to use it. You've had the floor. Let the board deliberate. Vaughn closed his mouth. Diane looked around the table. I'd like to call the vote. They waited in the hall outside the boardroom. Vivian stood with her back against the wall, arms crossed, looking at the floor. Caleb stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, close enough that she could feel him there, without either of them having to do anything about it. Diane's on your side, he said. I think so. She looked at Vaughn like he was a problem she'd been waiting to solve for a long time. She has. They have a history. A pause. He tried to use her position on the board against her 3 years ago. She doesn't forget things. Good. Silence. Caleb? Yeah. What I said in there. You said the true thing, he said quietly. Lily would be proud. Something moved through Vivian, a sound that was half exhale, half something else. A release of something that had been held at a specific tension for a very long time. What happens, she said carefully, if they vote against me? Then you appeal. You build the legal case. You take the time you need. And you... He turned to look at her. I already told you, he said. Together. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear and steady and completely present. The contract ends in 4 months, she said. I know. After it ends. I know, Vivian. I'm not asking about after the contract, she said. I'm asking about... She stopped. I'm asking about you, what you want. Not the arrangement, not the strategy. You. He looked at her for a long moment. I want to keep making coffee at 5 in the morning, he said. In your kitchen, with your 4-button machine. A pause. I want to watch Lily tell your goldfish things in Latin, which she started doing. I don't know when that started. I want to sit across from you at the kitchen table, while you mark up reports and not say anything, because you don't need me to say anything, you just need someone to be there. He held her gaze. And I want you. Not the CEO. Not the managed version. The woman who goes to a hospital on Saturday mornings, and whose fish is named Theorem, and who took 32 years to learn how to let someone in past the part that makes decisions. She was very still. That's what I want, he said. The boardroom door opened. Diane Forsyth stood in the threshold. Vivian, the board has reached a decision. The vote was 7-5, in her favor. Vaughn received the result with the controlled expression of a man who has learned to lose without showing it, which meant he showed it everywhere except his face. He stood, buttoned his jacket, it nodded once at Diane Forsyth, and walked past Caleb in the doorway without acknowledgement. Caleb watched him go. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the particular clean satisfaction of a thing completed the way he felt when a piece of furniture came back from broken to whole, when the structure was sound, and the work was finished, and it could hold the weight it was made to hold. Inside the boardroom, the 5 board members who had voted in Vivian's favor were standing, coming forward, the shift in the room palpable and immediate. Diane Forsyth was the first to reach her. Well done, Diane said quietly. Your grandfather would have... She paused. He would have had opinions, but he would have been proud. Vivian accepted this with the grace of someone who has learned to receive complicated things about complicated people she loved. She turned and found Caleb in the doorway. She crossed the room to him. He opened his mouth to say something he wasn't sure what, some version of "it's over," or "you did it," or something adequate to the moment. She took his face in both her hands and kissed him. Right there. In the doorway of the boardroom on the 34th floor of Whitmore Global, with 12 board members and the entire weight of everything they'd been through, and the ghost of a contract and the reality of everything that had replaced it. He kissed her back. The boardroom may have reacted. He genuinely could not tell. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright, and her composure was entirely gone, and she looked for the first time since he'd met her in a restaurant in the rain exactly like herself. The contract, she said. What about it? I want to tear it up. We can do that. Tonight. Okay. And then I want to... She stopped, looked at him. I want to start over, not the arrangement, not the performance. I want to... Vivian. What? We already started over, he said. About 3 weeks ago, if I'm placing it correctly. You just weren't ready to say so out loud. She looked at him. Then she laughed. Not the controlled almost smile. Not the carefully recovered expression. An actual laugh, full and unguarded, and briefly completely free of everything she was carrying. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then she pulled herself back together, squared her shoulders, and turned to face the room with the expression of a CEO who has just retained control of her company and is ready to move forward. But her hand found his, and she didn't let go. He called Lily from the lobby. "Daddy, how did it go?" "She won." A sound of pure, uncomplicated delight. "I knew it." "Did she say the true thing?" "She said the true thing." "And did it work?" "It worked, baby. See, I told you." Then, with the particular casual confidence of someone who has been right about something important, "Is she happy?" He looked across the lobby to where Vivian was speaking with Diane Forsyth, and even from this distance, even through the composed professional exterior, he could see it, the thing underneath the ground that was there now, the thing that had replaced the armor. "Yeah," he said. "I think she is." "Good." A pause. "Daddy, can we have the chicken tonight? The garlic one?" "Yeah, we can have the chicken." "Can Ms. Vivian pick the garlic powder this time?" He smiled. "I'll ask her." "Okay, tell her I said she did really good today." "I will." "And Daddy?" "Yeah." "I'm proud of you too," Lily said. "Not just her, you too." He stood in the lobby of Whitmore Global 34 floors below the room where everything had just changed and felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not the absence of grief. Exactly. Grief didn't have an absence. It just changed shape over time, but something alongside it. Something forward-looking. Something that had been waiting patiently in the back of him for long enough that he'd stopped expecting it to show up. "Thanks, baby girl," he said. "I'll see you at dinner." He hung up. He went to find his wife. The contract burned well. That wasn't metaphorical either. Vivian had a small fireplace in the study decorative, mostly the kind that gets used twice a year in a house, managed by people whose job is to make everything look intentional. And that evening after dinner, after Lily had eaten the garlic chicken and declared it the best batch yet, and then fallen asleep on the couch with Theorem's bowl placed carefully on the coffee table beside her, because she'd decided the goldfish shouldn't be alone. Caleb and Vivian sat across from each other at the study desk. The contract was 12 pages. Vivian had retrieved it from the fireproof safe in her closet and set it on the desk between them without ceremony. They both looked at it for a moment. "You want to do it?" Caleb asked. "Together," she said. They tore it in half, then quarters, then smaller, until the legal language and the dollar amounts and the non-disclosure clauses were confetti in their hands. And Vivian carried the pieces to the fireplace and set them on the grate and touched a match to the edge of the first page. It caught immediately, clean and fast, the way paper burns when it's ready. They watched it go. 4 months left on the term, Caleb said. Yes. So technically we destroyed the evidence of an agreement we were still bound by. She looked at the fire. Technically. Is that a problem? Not for me. A pause. Is it for you? He watched the last corner of the last page curl and go dark. No, he said. The agreement I intend to keep doesn't need paper. She turned from the fireplace and looked at him, and in the low light of the study, she looked like herself in the fullest sense of that, not the version presented to boardrooms or business journals or charity galas, but the original version, the one that existed before the corporation, and the loss, and the 15 years of learning to be formidable in a world that required it of her constantly. She looked like a woman who had fought hard for a very long time and had just for the first time decided she was allowed to also rest. He crossed the room to her. He put his arms around her the way you hold something you have no intention of letting go of. She leaned into it not tentatively, not with the careful calibration she brought to everything else completely. Her forehead against his shoulder, both hands at his back. They stayed like that while the fire finished its work. Thank you, she said quietly into his shoulder. For what specifically? For not being manageable. He pressed his lips briefly to the top of her head. You're welcome, he said. Lily woke up at 9:15 to find them both in the sitting room. Vivian actually reading for the first time in a week, without also having 3 other things open, and Caleb doing what he did when he needed to work with his hands, and there was no furniture immediately available, which in this case meant he had found a small clock in the hallway that had been running 4 minutes slow since apparently before anyone could remember, and had taken it gently apart and was in the process of correcting it. Lily appeared in the doorway with her hair sideways and her eyes still mostly closed. She surveyed the room. "Did everything work out?" she asked with the directness of someone who has been asleep and doesn't have the patience to approach things gradually. "Yes," Caleb said. "Good." She patted over to Vivian and leaned against her arm with the specific weight of a child who has decided someone is safe, the same way she leaned against Caleb, the gesture that meant, "I've assessed you and my conclusion is favorable." Vivian went still for just a moment, the surprise of it, the unasked-for warmth of it, and then she put her arm around Lily with a naturalness that Caleb didn't think she was aware of. "You should be asleep," Vivian said. "I know, I just wanted to check." Lily yawned. "Daddy, the clock was slow." "I know, I'm fixing it." "You fix everything." "I try." She looked at the two of them, her father with the clock parts, Vivian with the book, and her arm around a 7-year-old. She hadn't planned on the fire low in the study behind them, the house quiet and full of the specific warmth that comes not from any thermostat, but from people deciding consciously and completely that they are home. "Okay," Lily said, satisfied. She pushed herself off the couch. "Good night." "Good night, baby." "Good night, Lily," Vivian said. Lily stopped in the doorway. "Ms. Vivian?" "Yes." "You can just call me Lily. You don't have to say the whole thing every time." A pause. "Lily," Vivian said. The name sat in the room simply and completely. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied that this transaction had been successfully completed, and disappeared back down the hall. Caleb set a gear down on the cloth beside him and looked at Vivian. She was looking at the door where Lily had been with the expression he'd learned to recognize, the one that had no management in it, the underneath one, the true one. "She does that," he said quietly. "Decides someone's worth it, and then just treats them like they always were." "Does she always decide this fast?" "She decided about you in the car on the way over, when she found out you had a fish." Vivian made a sound. The real laugh, brief and unguarded, the one that had appeared for the first time in the boardroom hallway, and had started showing up more frequently, since like something that had been kept in a closed room and was learning slowly that the door was open now. The fish was the deciding factor. The fish was the deciding factor. She shook her head. Then she went back to her book, and Caleb went back to the clock, and the room held them both in the easy silence of people who no longer need to fill the space between them with anything except presence. The weeks that followed moved differently than any weeks Caleb had lived since before Dana died. Not easier, necessarily. His life did not become simple by virtue of being better. There were still complexities. Still the ongoing aftermath of the board meeting, and the press, still Vaughn operating at the edges, with the patience of a man who has decided to wait for the next opening. There was still the daily negotiation of two very different people, learning to genuinely share a life, rather than perform the sharing of one. But the quality of the difficulty changed. Before, difficulty was something Caleb carried alone. That was the fundamental condition of his life after Dana. He was the one who held the weight, because there was no one else to hold it with him, and he had made his peace with that. He had built himself into someone who could carry it without bending. Now there was someone on the other side. Vivian did not make things easier in the soft cushioning way. She made them better in the way that a good structural beam makes a building better, by bearing load cleanly, without complaint, in a way that lets everything above it stand straighter. When the remaining complications of the board situation required attention, she handled them with a precision that was extraordinary to watch up close. When Caleb had a difficult week, a stretch of days where the job he'd been quietly interviewing for fell through, and the frustration of it sat on him like weather, she didn't offer comfort in the conventional sense. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me what you want to do. Not what's available. What you actually want to do." And then she listened. Really listened with the same focused attention she gave to everything that mattered to her. No one had asked him that in 3 years. What do you want to do? Not what can you manage. Not what's realistic. What do you want? He told her about the furniture. Not the side hustle version. Not the gap filler. The real version, the one he'd never let himself take seriously. Because serious things required investment, and investment required stability. And stability was always one crisis away from being a luxury. He told her about the idea he'd had for 2 years and never written down, because writing it down would have made the gap between it and reality feel too large. A restoration workshop. Small. Focused on quality over volume. Taking pieces that had history estate sale, finds inherited furniture that needed repair, antiques that had been damaged and returning them to what they were, or making them into something better than they'd been. Work that required skill and patience, and the kind of attention that most people in a hurry couldn't afford to give. He told her this on a Tuesday evening, not looking at her, keeping his voice level, because saying it out loud to someone who might take it seriously was somehow more vulnerable than anything he'd said in the boardroom or the sitting room or the study with the fire. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What would you need to start?" she asked. "Space, equipment, some capital for the first few months before it's self-sustaining." "How much capital?" he told her. She nodded the way she nodded when she was doing math. "That's manageable," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference, and I know you understand that difference." She held his gaze. "I have resources, and you have a skill and a plan, and I am not going to pretend that those two things shouldn't logically meet just because of who we are to each other. That's not charity. That's a partnership." He looked at her. "Partnership," he said. "Partnership," she said steadily. "You kept this company's marriage agreement intact when $150,000 said otherwise. You can accept a business investment without it touching your pride." He sat with this for a moment. "You're very good at framing things." "I run a company. It's required." "Vivian." "Yes. Thank you." She picked up her coffee. "Don't thank me yet. I expect a full business plan by Friday. Projected timeline, startup costs, revenue model. I'm an investor, not a patron." He almost laughed. "Friday," he said. "With proper margins." "With proper margins." And Caleb. "Yeah. It's a good idea. It was always a good idea. You should have started it 2 years ago." He looked at the table. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I should have." The workshop opened 8 months later. Not large, a converted space in a neighborhood that was in the process of becoming itself again, the kind of area where the building still had good bones, and the rents were still within reach, and the people who lived there had the specific quality of caring about where they were. The sign above the door was simple: Brooks Restoration. The lettering had been suggested by Lily, who had strong opinions about fonts, and had presented 3 options with handwritten notes explaining the reasoning behind each. They'd gone with her first choice. The opening was a Saturday. No event, no press release, no ribbon cutting. Just the door open, and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, and the work itself visible through the front window, which was what Caleb had wanted. Not a presentation of the thing, but the thing itself doing what it was supposed to do. Vivian came at noon with Lily and Theorem, who had been relocated temporarily to a travel bowl that Lily had selected at the pet store, with the same systematic thoroughness she applied to all major decisions. "Theorem needs to see it," Lily had explained with the certainty of someone who has considered and dismissed all counter-arguments in advance. Caleb had not argued. Vivian stood in the middle of the workshop and looked around at the 2 pieces currently in progress on the work tables, at the tools arranged with the same careful order he brought to everything, at the small framed photograph on the shelf above the bench. She moved closer to look at the photograph. It was Dana. Sitting on the front steps of their old apartment, laughing at something off-camera, Lily as a baby on her lap. He'd put it there the first morning before anything else, before he'd even set up the tools. Vivian looked at it for a long moment. "She would have liked this," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "She would have told me I should have done it years ago." "Smart woman." "The smartest." He paused. Second smartest. Vivian turned to look at him. Second. Second, he confirmed with complete composure. She held his gaze for a moment. I'll allow it, she said. Lily had set Theorem's bowl on the corner of the cleanest work table and was explaining the restoration process to the goldfish with the patient detail of a docent. And this is where Daddy fixes things that are broken, not throws them away, fixes them, because Daddy says that most things are worth fixing if you know how. She paused, looking at Theorem with the seriousness of someone delivering important information. That's also true about people, but with people it's more complicated. Caleb looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Caleb. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The formal wedding happened on a Sunday in late October. Not because anyone legally required it, the original contract had included a marriage license as part of the arrangement, which meant they were technically already legally married. But Vivian had said 3 months after the board meeting quietly and without preamble that she wanted to do it again. The right way, with the actual understanding of what they were choosing. Caleb had said yes before she finished the sentence. It was small. 30 people. The Kress house because Margaret Kress had offered immediately and with a firmness that suggested the offer was non-negotiable, and because Vivian had looked unexpectedly moved by the offer in a way that settled the question entirely. Diane Forsyth came. Gloria came in a dress that she'd clearly spent considerable thought on and accepted Caleb's compliment with the same careful neutrality she brought to everything, while also looking exactly as pleased as a person can look while maintaining careful neutrality. Mrs. Patterson from the old apartment came because Caleb had called her, and she had said, "Of course I'm coming, baby," what time before he'd finished the invitation. She arrived with a covered dish that she refused to identify and sat next to Lily during the ceremony, and the two of them developed an immediate and apparently complete understanding. There were no rings from the original arrangement. They'd chosen new ones. Vivian had picked his simple, heavy gold, the kind built to be worn by hands that worked. He'd picked hers precise, elegant, with a small detail in the setting that was not immediately visible, but that she noticed immediately, and touched with one finger, and looked up at him with an expression that required no translation. Lily was the flower girl. She had selected her own dress after a process that Caleb could only describe as exhaustive, and she carried the basket of petals with the focused gravity of someone performing a significant civic function. She scattered them with impeccable timing and then took her place in the front row beside Mrs. Patterson and watched the ceremony with the expression of someone who has been right about something for a long time and is enjoying the confirmation. When the officiant reached the vows, Caleb had prepared his. He'd written them on the legal pad, the same one he'd used to build the cover story in the kitchen months earlier, which he found appropriate. He'd refined them over 2 weeks the way he refined everything patient methodical, getting it right. He looked at Vivian. She was looking at him with the expression he loved most. The underneath one, the true one, the one she no longer saved exclusively for the moments when no one was watching. He said, "I came into your life with 4 boxes and a garbage bag of stuffed animals and a 7-year-old who immediately asked about your fish. I didn't come with wealth or status or anything you needed strategically. I came with the ability to make coffee in the morning and tell the truth, and apparently, those were the specific things you were missing." A pause. "I promise to keep making the coffee. I promise to keep telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. I promise to be the person in the room who doesn't need anything from you except you, not the CEO, not the strategy, not the managed version. The real one. The one who goes to hospitals on Saturday mornings and laughs for 4 seconds and calls it enough." He held her gaze. "I loved my wife, and losing her taught me what it costs to love someone, and I chose to love you anyway, fully, without a contract, without conditions. That's not a thing I take lightly, and I need you to know that." He stopped. The 30 people in that room were very quiet. Vivian took a breath. She had also prepared. He watched her find the words. Not the prepared words, he could see the moment she set them aside and say the thing she actually meant. "I hired you because you couldn't be bought. The specific irony of that is not lost on me." The corner of her mouth moved. "I watched you refuse more money than I'd offered you for no reason, except that you'd made an agreement, and I realized that I had never in my life encountered a person whose word was simply complete, not contingent, not negotiable, just given and then kept." She paused. "I spent 15 years building walls that I was genuinely proud of, and you didn't knock them down. You just stood on the other side of them and made coffee every morning until I remembered that walls aren't the same as a foundation, and foundations are what actually hold things up." Her voice was steady and clear and fully, completely hers. "You gave Lily a home. You gave me the idea that I was allowed to have one, that I didn't have to earn it by being exceptional enough, that I could just have it because I'm a person and people get to have homes." She looked at him. "I choose you, Caleb Andre Brooks. Not because I need you strategically or structurally or for any reason that looks good on paper. I choose you because every morning I wake up and you are the first thing I am glad about. And I intend to keep being glad about you for every morning I have left." The officiant said something. They said what they were supposed to say. They put the rings on. In the front row, Lily made no sound at all, which was unusual enough that Caleb glanced over at the exact moment she looked at him, and her face was the face of his daughter, in her fullest version. His eyes, Dana's jaw, and something that was entirely her own, something clear and open, and completely quietly joyful. He winked at her. She grinned with everything she had. 1 year after the contract was signed, Caleb was in the workshop on a Thursday afternoon, 2 months after the wedding, working on a roll-top desk that had come in with a broken timbre and water staining on the left side panel. The owner had inherited it from her grandmother. She'd brought it in with photographs of what it looked like when it was right the way people bring in photographs of a person they want to recognize again. How was good at this? He had always been good at this. But he understood it differently now, not just as a skill, not just as the practical application of patience and knowledge, but as a thing with meaning. The restoration of something that carried history. The care involved in returning a thing to what it was without erasing what had happened to it. The understanding that broken was not the same as lost. Howe was thinking about none of this consciously. He was just working his hands doing what they knew how to do, the late afternoon light coming in through the front window and laying across the desk in the way that makes you aware of the texture of a surface, every line and grain of it. His phone buzzed. A photograph from Vivian. Taken from her office window, the city spread out below in the particular gold of late October light. Below it still the view from the 32nd floor. "Still mine. Thought you'd want to know." He looked at the photograph for a moment. He typed back, "Good. See you at 6. 3 dots. Then I'll be there at 6:15. He set the phone down. He picked up his tools. He went back to the desk. 45 minutes later, the door opened, and Lily came in straight from school, backpack on, still wearing the look she always wore at the end of a school day, which was the look of someone who has been required to be contained for 7 hours and is now free. "How was school?" "Fine. We did fractions. I already knew fractions." "I know you knew fractions." "Mrs. Delgado didn't know I knew fractions." "Now she does. Now she does." Lily dropped her backpack on the chair designated for this purpose and came to look at the desk. "Is this the grandmother one?" "Yes." She looked at it carefully, the way she'd learned to look at the pieces that came in, not just the surface but the structure, the joints, the places where the damage was, and where the original intention was still visible underneath. "The timbre is the hard part." "The timbre is the hard part." "But you can fix it." "I can fix it." She nodded satisfied and took her usual spot on the stool in the corner with her homework. They worked in parallel. Caleb at the bench, Lily at her homework, the late afternoon going on outside the workshop, holding them both in the specific warmth of familiar things. At 6:14, the door opened. Vivian came in still in her work clothes, her coat over her arm, her hair slightly wind-disrupted from the walk from the car. She looked at the desk. She looked at Lily. She looked at Caleb. She set her coat on the other chair. "How's the timbre?" "Better than yesterday." "Good." She came around the bench and looked at the work, and he stepped slightly aside to give her the angle, and she looked at it the way she'd learned to look at it, with real attention. The staining on the panel. Treating it this week, it'll come up. I believe you. She straightened. Lily, how were fractions? Already knew them. Of course you did. Mrs. Delgado was surprised. I imagine she was. What's for dinner? Daddy hasn't said. They both looked at Caleb. He looked at the two of them, his daughter on her stool with her homework, his wife with her coat on the chair and her workday still on her face, and her full attention available now in the way it was when she walked through the door of a space that was theirs, and he felt clearly and completely the thing he'd stopped expecting to feel again. Not the absence of everything hard. The hard things were still there. Grief didn't leave it changed shape. Money required attention. The world was complicated in all the ways it had always been complicated. Vaughn still existed, operating at whatever distance the board vote had moved him to, patient and watching. None of that was gone. But here was this. A workshop in a neighborhood that was becoming itself again. A 7-year-old who already knew fractions. A woman who had spent 15 years building walls and was learning carefully and with the same precision she brought to everything, how to build a home instead. Here was the desk on the bench, broken and being returned to itself. Here was the photograph of Dana on the shelf, watching all of it with the particular complicated love of someone who is both present and gone, and at peace with both. Here was Caleb Brooks, who had walked into this year with 4 boxes and a garbage bag of stuffed animals, and a daughter who asked about fish, and no idea that a fake marriage could become the truest thing he'd ever lived inside. Pasta, he said. Lily, put your homework away in 10 minutes. Vivian, there's coffee if you want it. There's always coffee, Vivian said, and the way she said it, the specific warmth of it, private and particular, and meant only for him, was the whole story in 3 words. He turned back to the desk. He picked up his tools. He kept working. That was the thing about Caleb Brooks that the contract had never been able to capture, and that Alexander Vaughn had never been able to find a lever on, and that the board with its votes, and the press with its 4-word headlines, and all the machinery of a world that measured people by their market value had never been able to account for. He was a man who showed up, every morning, without being asked, without calculating the return, without requiring the outcome to be certain before he committed to the work. He showed up, and he did what needed doing, and he loved what he loved with his whole capacity, and he kept his word. That was all. That was everything. The desk would be finished by the end of the week. The owner would come to pick it up, and she would see her grandmother's furniture standing whole again, the damage repaired, the original beauty of it, present and intact, and carrying everything it had always carried without any of it being erased. And Caleb would wipe down the bench and put the tools away and turn off the light in the workshop and drive his family home through the city in the early dark of October, and the house would be warm when they got there, and they would have dinner at the table that had started as a stranger's table and become their own. And his daughter would tell them about fractions, and his wife would mark up reports and reach over without looking to steal a piece of bread off his plate, and he would let her, because he always let her. And the house would be full of the sound of people who have chosen each other specifically and completely without any contract requiring them to stay. He had started this as a man with nothing left. He ended it as a man who had everything that mattered and knew this time exactly what that was worth.